And they've tried everything from solar and wind mandates to banning gas-powered cars to all of the net zero rules and regulations, the intentional collapse of our energy rationing, the intentional collapse of food production going after the Netherlands farmers with the net zero policies and all the other farmers.
Hey folks, Wayne here, and today I'm going to talk about a little something different, climate change, and how it affects the earth and the people and everything around us. And why is oil being mistreated? And I think there's a theory that oil is bad for the universe, basically, and bad for our environment and bad for the air. No, I don't think it is. What I think is bad for the climate is manufacturers, because when you burn plastic or mold plastic or make plastic, guess what? Plastic has chemicals in it. Those chemicals got to go somewhere. They go up into the air through the stacks that comes out of most of those plants. You know, when you look at a plant, you see smoke coming out at the top. Okay, that's where most of pollution comes from manufacturing. And you don't have to take it from me. Just look at China and see they got so much manufacturing that parts over there are so smogged out that you can barely see the buildings as you're walking down the street. And this is the truth. If you don't believe me, go look it up. But we're going to look and watch this about climate change. I hope you like it, and let's get started.
Quite the pronouncement that you make about President Trump being able to, kind of pierce through this whole scam once and for all. Can you walk us through what you mean by it?
Yes, okay. Trump 1.0, he gets elected in 2016. The entire climate change movement, from the World Economic Forum to the United Nations, Al Gore, the whole Green New Deal infrastructure here in the United States, all were basically, Donald Trump is like a kidney stone. It's going to hurt a little bit, but we'll pass him through the system and we're going to continue with no problem. They had one problem. Donald Trump came in and did a lot of reversals, but it was coming back from Obama. So we went yin-yang with Trump, and then Biden comes in and goes the other way, and now Trump's back. The reason this is different than Trump's first term is because we've had now 8 years of the global environmental climate change movement with the UN Paris Agreement, and they've tried everything from solar and wind mandates to banning gas-powered cars to all of the net zero rules and regulations, the intentional collapse of our energy rationing, the intentional collapse of food production going after the Netherlands farmers with the net zero policies and all the other farmers in Europe, to the point where they rebelled and sprayed manure on EU headquarters, and they halted the Green Deal in Europe last summer because of the EU elections.
And then they find out that after 8 years of doing this Green New Deal, spending hundreds of billions of dollars on it, it didn't do a damn thing for us, our country, our air, our land, nothing. The only thing it's doing is getting worse. Where do you think those solar panels on top of your roof, do you think those just stay there for the next 50,000 years? 100 years? 50 years? No. Because they break, they crack because of the sun, or if birds happen to drop out of the sky and land on them just right, they will crack. If the bird, I've seen birds fall out of the sky before, just die flying. Boom. Okay? People throw rocks. The wind blows, debris blows on them. These things get destroyed. And if they don't, people don't clean them the way they're supposed to, and they only get used halfway. And if they do clean them, these things have to be replaced within 15 to 20 years, including the batteries. Where do you think all these chemicals that make these solar power batteries and plates come from?
And then they also were coming after our freedom of movement, France banning short-haul flights, and CNN proposing carbon passports, and all this sustainable aviation nonsense. All of this happened. We saw the Ukraine war and the effect it had on Europe. They were caught completely unprepared, and they have to rely now on the Middle East. They had to rely on Russia. They had to rely on all the green energy they had wasn't working. We now know that green energy is more expensive. It's not green. It takes 500,000 pounds to dig up the earth to make one EV battery. We know that it takes tons and tons of non-recyclable plastic, steel, concrete to make wind turbines. They run on oil. They're horrible to recycle. They don't produce any measurable energy. They're under 14% globally and in the U.S., despite all the trillions and hundreds of billions in subsidies and mandates.
So he's telling us that all the hundreds of billions of dollars that we put into green energy, there is no green energy. It barely works, and it's more expensive than oil. Really?
So when Donald Trump comes around 2.0, the whole world is like ready to walk away from this, and he comes in with like a pin and just pop. And that is why I say this may be the most consequential presidency, exceeding that of even Ronald Reagan, because he's the right man at the right time, and he understands one thing, and you open the show with it, Kara, that framing and that narrative. It's not like he's like, well, of course, climate's a problem, we need a solution, and he's just like, it's a scam. And that resonates, and what that's going to cause, we've already seen with it. I was in Baku, Azerbaijan, 23 hours of nonstop travel from Washington, D.C. to Baku to go to that stupid UN COP29 climate summit. We know that Donald Trump picked up the phone, talked to Milei, the Argentinian leader, and he pulled out his entire delegation from the UN climate summit. We know the French Foreign Environmental Ministry didn't even bother to attend. We know that the host country said oil was a gift from God. We know there was massive infighting. I was able to witness firsthand at a UN summit what I call the Trump effect. He was imploding the entire summit to the point where they want to ban countries who don't support the narrative, which means they're going to end up completely collapsing once they start banning countries. So my point being, Donald Trump understands it's the power of the message and narrative, and he's also, of course, gone through everything from offshore wind to solar. He's going after the Inflation Reduction Act. We need the Republican Congress to follow up on that. And, of course, he's pulled us out of the UN Paris. We now have the possibility of Hungary, Poland, Argentina, what I call a Clexit, a climate exit from this UN Paris Agreement. Again, these are significantly consequential because it's going to be very hard for them to recover from this in 4 or 8 years because it's kind of like defund the police. It was a theory, academics for decades. Oh, if you defund the police, the cities will be safer. Well, guess what? They actually got to try it, a real-world experiment, and it was a disaster. Within a year, Joe Biden's begging, refund the police at a State of the Union. Same thing with climate. It was a theory for decades. They finally got to implement their net zero Green New Deal, and it was a disaster everywhere it was tried, from Sri Lanka through Europe, through Australia and Canada, and the people are rejecting it. So that's why I say he's the most consequential president. This is unprecedented, and he's doing it with such clarity of message. And as a communications guy, that's what really appeals to me.